And testing. The date is November 14th, 2018. It is 6 o'clock in the evening on a cold November evening in Frisco, Texas. And this is ITSE 2309 database programming at Collin College, normally scheduled meeting. Somewhat intimidated by today's lecture, but we'll manage. Let's see, why isn't this shutting down? Okay, here we go. I want to talk about some things tonight. Let's talk about the invoice line items and the invoices table. And I've raised this matter before. The invoices table has an invoice total. And the invoice total is determined by the sum of the invoice line item amount where the invoice ID matches. And I've pointed out over and over that let me see if I can view. Get connected here. That in the APDB, this is from last semester, and the tables, that the invoice line items, if we look at the columns, we have a two-factor primary key, the invoice ID and the invoice sequence number. And if we go over there and look at those guys, look at what's in there. So if I want to go over here and say, show me the data, notice I see the invoice ID running 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And the invoice sequence number is all ones. And then we get to the 12. We have 12-1, 12-2, 12-3, 12-4, and then we have 13, and everything is ones again. And this is a terrible design for a table. I don't need two factors. I could do it just fine with one. So if I were doing that table, I would roll it back to a single factor. The invoice sequence would be the primary key. It would start at 1 and it would just increment. I would either use an identity or a sequence. I'd probably use a sequence because I like that better than an identity. But whatever, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it would be unique. And so it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 until we got to 12, and then it would be 12, 13. So instead of 12-1, 12-2, 12-3, 12-4, I would have 12, 13, 14, 15. And the invoice ID could be 12 all the way. So invoice ID would be 12. It would be 12, 12, 12, 13, 12, 14, 12, 15. I would be able to tell you very quickly which invoices belong to 12. It would be where the invoice ID matched. So I wouldn't lose anything. So this would become the primary key. The invoice sequence would be the primary key. Invoice ID would just be a plain old foreign key into the invoices table. That's how I designed that one. Now, we have the invoice line item amount. So we have the invoice line item amount, and the sum of the invoice line item amount is the invoice total over in the invoices table. But nothing is enforcing that. As I pointed out last time, I'm free to change the invoice line item amounts without changing the invoice total. meaning I have an inconsistency now in my data. This is bad. Okay, so we got a problem. Now, what can we do? Go ahead. Sure. We don't want to have a field that contains data that I can calculate, which is why we don't keep the winner of a game in the table. I can calculate that easily. That's nothing to it. This is a little bit different. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there is some reason I need to have the invoice total up to date, but there is nothing that's keeping it up to date. Okay, now what could I do? Well, first thing I think I would probably do, I would think about making the invoices table, what we see as a table, I would tend to make it a view. I would have an underlying table, and the view would sum the invoice line items. I think I have done that here. I don't think I think I do that later. Let's look at what we could do. I say, as I start through this discussion, I say, locate your create AP scripts, and that I pretty well trashed my data a couple of times. So if that happens to you, just run the script again. What do we have in it now? And I'm going to focus right now on invoice ID 2. That's right at the top. I don't know why I chose 2 instead of 1, but invoice ID 2, let's look at what do we have in the invoice line items and what do we have in the invoice total, and are they right? And I believe they are. Help if I would execute my use. So I'm going to execute these 2 lines. I just want to look at invoice ID 2, what is in the invoice line items and what's in the invoices. And I believe it will be consistent. And so I have one row in there, invoice line item amount, invoice total, $40.20, $40.20, everything's fine. But if I changed one of them, it would just change. Nothing is tying them together. Nothing is causing me to update one or the other. Are you with me? Okay, so, and then I put this down, what if your data are fresh, meaning if nothing has changed it. So probably want to refresh your data here. Okay, because I have a primary key on 2 columns. I don't like primary keys on 2 columns. I just don't want that ever, ever, ever. If I can get away with it, if I can get around it, I can easily get around it here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a a non-clustered index on one of those columns by itself. I do not have an index on just invoice ID. I say on invoice line items. I should have said invoice line items dot invoice ID. And so if it exists, I drop it and I create the non-clustered index. What is a non-clustered index? I don't have to say non-clustered, by the way. You can only have one clustered index. What does a clustered index mean? We have one clustered index, and that's basically primary key. Now, does the primary key have to be a clustered index? No, you can uncluster it and create it. So if you have to have a primary key, you can create a clustered index on something else by unclustering the primary key. Primary key will by default be a clustered index. Google unclustering an index, then you can create another one. You can only have one clustered index. Clustered index means this is how your data are stored on the disk. So it's sorted by that on the disk. A clustered index, you can have one of them, only one, and that will be your best possible access to that. So that's your best index. But if I already have a clustered index, I can't create another one. So this one will be non-clustered. I didn't have to say non-clustered. It will be non-clustered. I could have just said create index. It would accomplish the same thing. Invoice line items, invoice ID. I need an index on invoice line on invoice ID. I have an index on invoice ID and invoice sequence together, but I don't have an index on just one of them. Now I do. Okay, this only happens once. Now, I'm going to create an insert trigger. Okay, here's where I'm going with this. Create create a trigger instead of insert. So this is an insert, and if we're running a trigger, I do not like multiple line inserts. I can. What do I have to do? I have to open a cursor into the inserted table. Select everything from inserted. I don't like cursors. They're a pain in the neck for me to write. And I would just as soon say, no, you have to insert them one at a time. So if I'm going to run a trigger, I'm probably going to disallow multiple inserts just because it is such a pain in the neck. I have to run two cases, one of them where I just do the insert, and the other one where I open a cursor and process through it. And that makes my trigger get long and tedious, and I don't like it. So I'm always going to do this. If the count is greater than 1, sorry, can't do it. Just throw an error. Don't even have a catch block. I'll let them deal with it. Not a major error, it's just you can't do that. We don't accept that. Okay. What am I going to do now? Here's where we begin. Go out there and grab all of the values out that are coming into from inserted. Some of them might be null. I don't think they're all required. Okay. Well, there I just declare the variables. There I go out there and select them from inserted. Now, if you're in Oracle, you really like Oracle at this point because you can just do that in one variable. You just declare one variable, you say it's the same type as a line in the table, and then you just grab it all into that easily. So, yeah, Oracle's good. It's like my Mercedes. Okay, so I have everything in these variables that came in to the trigger. You with me that far? Here's where we start. Begin transaction. And I'm beginning a try block here because I want to catch any errors. The next statement executes a lock. Okay, I'm going to lock the invoices table. How many rows will I lock up in the invoices table? How many rows will I select right there? What's primary key? Yes, what's primary key? Yeah, you got it. How many rows? 1. How many rows? No? We got one invoice ID. What's the primary key to the invoices table? Invoice ID. It has to be unique. I have one. Has to be unique. I can only be selecting one table, one row. Okay? I don't care if somebody else is reading that or using that in the calculation. That's their problem. I'm not going to change it. Primary keys don't typically change. Okay? So if my life depended on it, I might worry about taking a stronger lock. But a UPD lock is an update lock. That means that I'm taking a lock that I'm willing to share. That means that other people are allowed to read what I have locked. Okay, don't like locking up primary keys. So I'm going to let other people do it. So a UPD lock is a low level lock, meaning well, sometimes we say a promiscuous lock, a lock that allows other people to use it. Okay, one of the now remember when we had to name our constraints? Index. Wait. I created an index right here. No, that's on invoice line items. Okay. So remember, I made you name that constraint, PK invoices. That will also be the name of the index. Okay. So remember your index names, write them down. That's part of your documentation. If you have index names, write them down. And if you create those indexes, if you create a primary key, when you create and you give it a name, that will be the name of the index. I'm not using the primary. Yes, I am. I'm using the primary key index here from the invoices table. Lock it up. Okay. Nobody is allowed to change it. Nobody's going to change a primary key anyway, but nobody is allowed to change it. It's locked. If you try, you fail. Okay, here's the next one. This one's more important. Select invoice line item amount from invoice line items where invoice ID equals at invoice ID. Now, how many rows will I lock up? Remember, I am in the invoice line items table. Answer is, I don't know. A bunch. Okay. If I lock those guys up, I don't want anybody else getting into that range. So I'm locking it serializable. That means that nobody, not only can nobody else change the rows that I'm locking, but nobody else can come along. If I have invoice ID 2, for example, nobody else can insert an invoice ID 2 into invoice line items, because that would change the group that I'm working with. They have to wait until I'm finished. Now, if I'm I might be locking up half the table here. I don't know how many rows. However many I'm locking, I'm taking a very high level lock. A very exclusive lock. Sometimes it's called a lock X, lock exclusive. So you have lock share and lock X. So I'm taking a lock that nobody else can touch them. Nobody can read them. Nobody can, I'll let you read them, but I won't let you insert anything into the table that would change anything about that group. Okay, that's really what that means. So if I take the sum of that now and I turn around and haven't released the lock and I take the sum of it later, nothing can change about that. Once I take that lock, you can't insert or delete from that group. Are you with me? That's what serializable means. So serializable is the highest level lock. Okay. Now, insert into line items. What came into me? There was only one of them because I checked to make sure that the count. So I do the insert. There's where the insert happened. Okay. Money, declare at S as money. Calculate the sum. Now I have inserted. So now I take the sum of the invoice line items, update invoices, that invoice total equals S. Does that make sense? So I inserted into invoice, so I locked everything up, inserted into invoice line items, took the sum, updated the invoices to that sum. I'm done. And try, begin catch. I put a little note here that if you are working in Oracle, you cannot commit in a trigger. We're not working in Oracle, so we don't care. The solution is very similar to the one where we were writing the errata table. You have to put it out on the loopback server, and you can commit it over there. Begin catch, roll back, throw an error. I'm not sure whether it's redundant to throw the error and roll back or not, but it'll work. Transaction aborted. Everything rolls back. When I was testing it, I never did see that error message, so I don't know. If we get past that, in other words, we did not throw an error up here in this block, commit. Make it happen. Commit's finished. We're done. Okay, let's see. I'm going to start here and go down, go to here, and I'm going to execute. And everything is successful. I created the trigger, created the index, created the trigger. All right, now I'm ready to test it. So what do I have in there at this time? I have one invoice sequence, account 553, $40.20. The invoice total is $40.20. Let's find out if it works. I'm going to insert into the invoice line items table. Insert into invoice line items. Notice I have not set no count to off. So I'm going to see a count come up here when I execute this. Execute, and I don't know what this is. Okay, let's take a look. I want to go look at invoice line items. Let's find out what's in invoice line items. Now I have two rows in invoice line items. I have invoice line items amount of $40.20 and $20. So the total would be $60.20. Let's find out if that got updated correctly over in the invoices. $60.20. The idea being that that will always be correct. So I have a transaction that's doing that. Nothing can get in the middle of the transaction. Either all of the transaction works or all of the transaction fails. If the transaction fails, it rolls back. If the transaction works, then it's up to date. So it either leaves it the way it was, it does not insert anything into the invoice line items table. If it fails to update the invoices table, it rolls back the insert into the invoice line items. So the invoice line items is always consistent with the invoices table. And the other interesting thing about this is even if it wasn't before, it is now. Okay. even if you had a problem in that, right, it has just fixed it. I don't know whether that's good or bad. Let's say that that the amount that the invoice line items was different from the invoice amount, right? Let's I think I have reset the database. Not letting me drop. Oh, well. Let's just start here. Okay, clean everything up there. And so if I go up here, and look at that, it's 40/20. And if I look at, excuse me, invoices, it's also 40/20. What if it weren't? What if they were different? I could change it. I could make it be, I could make the invoice total be 100. Invoice, edit. Maybe 100. Nothing stopping it. It'll let me do that. So now when I execute this, I don't know why, well, I should see that be. I need to refresh my data. Get that. Let's see if that helped it. What? Okay. I put it in the wrong place, huh? I hose my data. What if they're not the same? Okay. Once I execute this, and this code executes, they will be the same. They will be consistent. That trigger will keep them consistent. Even if they weren't consistent, the invoice total will equal the sum of the invoice line items. Questions? All right. Anyway, I sent you this code. Take a look at it. Down here, I'm just kind of looking at it, testing the trigger. Like I say, you might want to locate, find your create AP SQL, and if you trash your AP database, don't worry about it. Just run the script. It'll fix everything. Okay. All right. Questions on that? Now, I'm motivating this discussion with that guy. Why might we want to keep the actual amounts in the invoices table as opposed to calculating it every time? Might, I said. Why? For auditing, yes, it could be like a audit table, right? We could check and see if they're balancing at the end of the day. It could also be a very hot table. It could be one that people are hitting, because hitting a table that has the actual values in it, it depends on how often are you updating it, as opposed to how often is it getting read. Right, right. It's gonna, and so there we go back to show plan. If we looked at show plan, it's going to be a whole lot easier to read it than it is to calculate it. And I started to create a view. I called it, invoices to, where instead of having the actual value there, it was calculated from the invoice line items table, and to show that the difference in the show plan. I'm not going to show a whole lot there. Okay. Statistics. I'm going to generate a couple fairly small tables of about 28,000 rows. Okay. Not really big by database standards, but it'll take me, probably 5 or 6 seconds to generate them. Uses the procedures. Since it uses the procedures, it should run on your data. This does not run as the public user, this runs as you. Okay. Since we said that we wanted to keep our table names and the order of I said I like the order. So the order of the procedure of the parameters should be consistent. At least I think they should be. We should all agree on the name of the table, the order of the parameters, and I guess in this environment we should agree on the name of the parameters, because you can pass them either way. I usually choose to pass by position, by order, which is what I've done here. If your order is different, you'll have to tweak this code a little bit. Now, it's really pretty straightforward. Tweak the code. I want you to make this run. Pretty straightforward stuff. Anything here comes straight out of COSC 1436. It's a basic C programming, or any kind of programming. I declare a few variables. Most of them are integers. I, J, and K are my generic integers, and I use them throughout. I have a start and a stop. 65 and 91. What's special about 65 and 91? ASCII people. ASCII 65. Capital A. ASCII 91. 65 plus 26. Capital Z. Okay. Big I, some chars in the error level. Error level is just a dummy variable. I don't use it for anything. I just have to pass it one, so I have one. What does this do? Set K, get start, while K is less than stop. Work through it. Begin. Set J, get stop, while J is start, while J less than stop. What have I got? I got a for loop there. A for loop inside of a for loop. Begin. Oh, look, I got a for loop inside of a for loop inside of a for loop. What am I doing? I'm generating 3 random letters, A through Z. I, J, K. Well, K, J, I is the smallest one. Insert the player. 65. Where do I generate my? So where somewhere in here I have to be generating a random. Be darned if I see where I'm generating it. This one is always going to run as you. Oh, grief. I want to see what I'm. AAA, AAB, AAC, AAD, on up through AAZ, AB, AAB, B, AB, C, and so on. So it's just incrementing each one. But you know, I'm trying to find where I generate the random. Well, it's got to be inside this loop. So IJK, stop, start through, stop, start through, stop. Where? What line? No, that's just an increment. Each one's got an increment. Okay, I'm not generating a random integer. I'm just going 1, 2, 3. So I starts at 65, so it'll be at A. Then when it increments, it's B. When it increments, it's C. So I'm casting them to, okay, I'm not generating. So this guy is not, the player number is not random. The player numbers are just any three digits, any 3 letters that you can think of. They're in the alphabet, uppercase, but they also work for lowercase. But any 3 uppercase letters will give you a valid player in the game. Okay. Therefore, I have 17,000 some odd players. 26 cubed. Okay. Basically, it's just 3 for loops. I'm going to generate about 10,000 games. I don't want you to know how many games exactly. About 10,000. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Not always, because the code selects random loop bounds, and so it's somewhere it's 10,000 plus or minus 50. Might very well attempt to generate a duplicate game. Probably will. We call that a collision, and in that case, your code just throws it out. I don't even look at error level. I'm just creating it. Rejects it and returns an error code. Calling routines ignoring it. We don't know how many games we're going to end up with, but it'll be somewhere around 10,000. So I start him here. I don't know why I'm using 9975. I don't know why I'm using that number. I've slept since I wrote this. Anyway, this is a while loop. Well, I is less than K. Oh yeah, 9975 is 25 less than 10,000, and I go until maybe I'm 25 more than 10,000, kind of on a random deal. So I'm generating a random number between 0 and 50, not including 50. And then I add that to 9975. So it'll be somewhere around 10,000, within 25. I don't want you to know exactly how many. So here I starts at 0 and it ends when it gets to that high number. So this is essentially a for loop also. And basically I'm generating 2 random characters. They'll be random, ABC and QXD. Right. Chances of generating 2 that are the same will be very small. The chances of generating 2 that I already have a game for are also small, but they exist. So, well, what happens? It just gets ignored. No, not a big deal. So
that's a random character, not necessarily a random number.
it's a random. It is a random number. This is a random number. So RAND is a random floating point. If I multiply that by 26, I now have a random number that has 26 in its significant digits to the left of the decimal. If I cast that as an int, I throw away the decimal, and now I have a random integer from between 0 and 26, not including 26. I add to that 65. Now I have a random integer from 65 through 91. Yes.
And when you pass the 65 to ASICC from A to ASICC from us.
Yes. 65 through 65 plus 26. 91.
So if you are letting the sequence determine
no.
ID, if the person is doing that, is it possible to modify this so that instead of getting numbers, I would be getting characters?
A sequence has if you select a sequence and you for some reason don't insert it, you never get it back. So just because you're using a sequence doesn't mean that in your table you will have all of them, because it's quite possible to be inserting it from a sequence and end up with 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 in there. If something happens and it can't insert it, you never get that number back again in your sequence. One of the downsides to a sequence. An identity doesn't have that problem. I still like sequences better. There's things you can do, but usually it's more trouble than it's worth to try to fix. So basically this is going to, since I know that all of my players from AAA through ZZZ are valid, I'm just going to generate a couple. I don't have to check them. Generate them, insert the game, we're done. $65, 26, 65, 75, 85. No, it'd be 86, wouldn't it? 26, 65, 75, 85, 86. I don't know why I said 91. I should have said 86.
So this one should be
No, 90 isn't Z. Is it?
90.
65?
So this should be 25.
Okay. 65, 75, 85 plus 5, 90. 91, 90, isn't 91 Z?
No, 90 is
Capital Z. Lowercase 90. So 65 plus 0 is A, and 65 plus 25. Yes. But I'm doing it right because in my code, I am going less than stop.
okay, and then yeah.
Right. And so it's the upper bound minus the lower bound number of times. So it's 91 minus 65. I go through it 26 times. Okay. Yeah. I don't think I ever use the, well, I do use it, it's 91, but I say less than,
Yeah.
not less than or equal to. Okay. About 10,000 rounds. How many games do I have? I've got to go look. I don't know how many games I have. That's my guess. How many games I have? How many games did I get? And there I probably should have said plus or minus 50, but I just said, well, whatever. I'm going to get a bunch of games. And so I go into a for loop here. So this is a for loop. I don't have a for loop, and I really wish I had a for loop. It would make my life a whole lot easier. If I don't have a for loop, what can I do? Well, I set the counter while the counter is less than the end value or less than or equal to. Increment the counter. Duh. Generate a random game ID in the range of game count plus 1. Grab the player IDs because I'm not, remember my create round uses the player IDs. Generate 2 game tokens, RP or S, just generate them. Like, I just use the same value, J. Use J down here, no reason. If J is 0, it's RP or S. RP or S, insert the round, count it and go. We now have 17,576 players because 26 cubed is 17,576. How many games? I don't know. Count them. How many rounds? I don't know. Count them.
So it means the player game and the round will be more than the player.
No, there'll be less than the players. And if I try to get all the players in games, I'm going to get a lot of collisions. So essentially, I'm hashing. I'm generating them, but if I try to go all the way to 17,000 games, I'm going to be, and I'm generating random players, I'm going to start colliding a lot. So I'm just going to be there spinning my wheels until if I try to have that many games, Actually, I can have a lot more games than that because each player can be, I can have 17,576 squared, I believe. But anyway, let's see, when I execute him, it takes could not find. Why can't it find it? I don't know. Let's save. Probably need to save it to my. We'll save it there. Execute. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8 seconds. There we go. In 8 seconds, it took that to generate 28,000 rounds. How many, if I've got 17,000, I know how many players I've got. I have every possible player you can make out of 3 characters. How many games? I have 9,987 games. How many rounds? I have 10,031 rounds. If you want to see all the games I've got, there's all the games. We could scroll through them. I won't put you through that. There are 9,987 of them, and so we can scroll through them here if you would like. It's really kind of a pain. Now, here's the one I'm really interested in. And here is where I'm going to say, we are really interested in these statistics. Why are we really interested? Because I said so, okay? Now, these statistics, think of all the things we can do if we knew this breakdown of how many games is player 1 in. Now I can talk about how many is player 1 winning or losing, and I know how many games player 1's in. So I took this, it's fairly simple statistic, and I'm going to pretend like this is our I don't know what you call this is what we're really, really interested in. We're going to materialize this with a table. Okay, these guys. We're going to build a table that has this in it. Now, what is it? 7 players are engaged in 3 games. No, excuse me. 3 players are engaged in 7 games. Okay. It changes. If I ran it again, that would change. Notice I got a nice binomial distribution going here, but you don't have to worry about that. Probabilities of this, it's very probable that the 7 games will be fewer than the number that are involved in 6 games. And I find that to be true almost all of the time. But it's not guaranteed to be true. If you run it 1,000 times, it might not be true. But this will be, okay, 14 players are involved in 6 games, 88 in 5. 3,698 players have 2 games. That many players are involved in 7 games. No, a player can be involved in 7 games, and all of his or her opponents can be involved in only 1. So player A is involved in a game with player B, player A with C, player A with D, could be 7. Yeah, yes, another 7 people. I agree. There just counts. we could ask questions like how many players are involved in 4 or more games?
So are these counts exclusive, in terms of,
I'm trying to keep them pretty simple. Go ahead with your question, please.
so like the number of players, 3, number of games, 7. So can those 3 be playing within those, there's a game between 2 of those 3 players, does that count in the number of games?
No, it's a straight count. How many players? Okay, you take a player. How many games is that player in? If it's 4, then he or she shows up in the 4th row. It keeps it simple. I'm trying to keep it simple. I agonized over what I wanted to do with it, and I think this is fairly simple. It's something that's not going to move. Now, as we start this, what we're going to do is we're going to materialize it. So I'm going to give you the view. I've given you this code.
Can we tweak it?
What?
Can we tweak your code?
You better not tweak my code. Yes.
Because I'm curious, the player have so many for the game.
Okay. Your trick is going to be, I want you to write a trigger that keeps a table up to date. So I want you to cause this view to become a table that is kept up to date by a trigger. You're going to this view, RPS statistics view, will become a table. And whenever you insert into games, rounds won't matter, into players or games, it will keep this table up to date. Remember, this table has nothing to do. This table has nothing to do with rounds.
Okay. So we update our program, and they will update this table and the trigger.
It is very much like my example from invoice line items and invoices. Very much like it. Now, when I wrote it, it looked almost like that. The code is very, very similar. Now, this view isn't going to help you a whole lot, but this is the view. Has 2 fields. PID. I don't know why I call it PID. It should be the, okay, PID. So how many PIDs are there and how many games do they have? So I have 1,000 players who have 4 games. So PID would be 1,000. How many of them? How many games do they have? 4. So if you go back and look at this, right? I have 393 players out of that 10,000 or so that have 4 games, exactly 4 games. Now, some things you could do with this, you could say how many have 4 or more, but I didn't tell you to do that. But you could do lots of stuff with it. So this would be some nice raw statistics that we could come off of and answer a lot of questions. Okay. Here's the view. Okay. Create view, RPS statistics. You can call yours RPS statistics. It will be a table. The table will start at 0, 0. You have 0 with count 0. Okay. It's a good question. What happens when it starts off? It's going to be tricky. Okay, you're going to have to think about it. Do you have a row that has 0 players in it? So 0 players have 4 games. You have no players with 4 games. Well, okay. I think I would suggest simply allowing it to have, when you start off with players, how many players do you have? You have 17,000 players if you like. You can use my code. You have 17,000 players that have 0 games because there aren't any games. Now, when you put 1 game in, you should see 17,000 minus 1 players with 0 games and 1 player with 2 players with 1 game. Well, notice that on this line I have 5,575 players that aren't in a game. In other words, those players never got generated by my routine. About what we're expecting. So for the most part, the big bear, 1 player, how many players are only in 1 game? Well, that's the biggest one, 6,480. If I ran it again, I'd get something like that. If I were to execute it a second time, oh, stop it. It takes 5 or 6 seconds to execute just because it's going through a lot of stuff. 9 seconds. This time I only have 2 players with 7. I might have had 1 player with 8 and 1 player with 7. I don't know. 6 players with 11, 6,515. But notice that we're keeping the same general distribution. And if you flip coins for enough times, this is what it's going to look like. We're just flipping coins. So we're seeing what we expect to see. Okay. Let's look at how I did it. And then I'm gonna, 7 o'clock, we're gonna break here in just a minute. Okay, start off, select PID and count from. Notice I have a union here. Select, and here I have a subquery, a derived table. You remember that from, okay. Select PID and count from this derived table. Select PID, count asterisk, so CNT, count asterisk as CNT. Here I have another union inside of there. So this just says select P1 ID, select P2 ID, count them, pass it up. Here we group by PID. If I have duplicate PIDs, they only count as 1. So remember, we're counting distinct. We don't count them all. Oh, this one is union all. Yeah, right. Union all. So if player one is involved in a game as player one and player N, let's say player N is player one in one game and player N is player two in another game, that would count as two games. So yes, it is union all. It took me a while to get that. Wait, what's going on here? Why is this always showing one? Because I'm only getting one. I'm ignoring duplicates. But when you put union all, that counts it as, okay? Now I do another union, but this is not a union all. This union just says I want all the players who are not in any games. So this says select PID and 0. I don't even bother counting them. If they're not in that set of people who have games, then they have 0 games. That's how I get my zeros. Okay. Now, you're welcome to look at that. I don't think that that view code is going to, you're not going to be able to just rewrite that view code or to pick that up and paste it into a trigger. Trigger's going to have to be rewritten. Now, you do better by looking at the trigger from the invoice line items. So take your counts each time the trigger fires, lock up the records, lock the destination record in the statistics table, lock the set of records that you want to sum, count them up, update the statistics table. So it looks a lot like it is just about like that example. Uh-huh. Yes, it will. This code will go into your trigger. So after your trigger has tested everything, then after you have inserted from the trigger, you do this. Right. You do this. So this comes at the very end of your insert trigger on players and games. The rounds this doesn't have anything to do with the rounds. If you insert a player, then you have to insert the player into the statistics table with a 0. This is the statistics table. This is what it looks like. I'm not going to show you. The table is just a table. It has 2 integers in it. It has an integer, how many players and how many games. It has a number of players, a number of games. So the table looks like this.
Okay. So when we right now it's 700.
Don't worry about that.
So if we add one more, so
okay.
One of these will update 1, right?
Let's see, if you add one more player, yes, you would update it, because if you add one player, he would have a 0 game. So 1 would come into the number of players for 0.
And then the second table update the game, and this will minus 1 and 1 of them.
If you update the games, then you will update those. Yes, it will. This is not an easy task. I'm trying to keep it as simple as I possibly can and do what we're trying to do, meaning maintain a table that has I'm not adding any extra complexity to it. It's really that simple, but the simple task can get difficult. Okay, so this, I'm trying to come up with something that might be something that you'd really do.
So we shall update in one table or three tables.
You're only going to be updating, let's see, okay, wait, go with me. If you insert into the players table, it has to be inserted into the number of players has to reflect that. So the total number of players, if I added up that line of number of players, I should get that number of rows. So if I insert a player, he should be inserted into that table somewhere. No, if I insert a player, he's going to insert into 0. Okay, you might have to lock up that whole table. Okay, so you might have to go through the whole thing, bring it up to date.
No, the random table just one time job, right?
Okay, and you do it that way.
Yeah. Then you say make it easy. So that's the one time job, and we get this table. And then we insert the one player, we add the updated row number 9.
Well, when you start, it's 0 players, 0 number of games, 0 number of players. When you insert, well, yes, it is.
Before we start, we already have this table. And then we
No.
insert the trigger. That's what you mean, right?
Well, but when you start, you have the table, but the table is 0, 0. It will be tricky.
Well, table 0 after you run this, the script, they will be at this table.
Okay, you show me what you're thinking, and no, not right now, not right now. Okay.
I just try to understand what is this assignment.
Okay.
So assignment is that you will give us a script. We run this script one time, and every time we update a player, they will update one of the rows.
Yes, every time you update a game, every time
we update a player, we update one of those, and we update a game.
We never update a player. We insert the player. We never update the player.
Okay, we insert one player. We update a row number 9.
Update a row, yes.
Yes, and we create a game. And we update one of the 2 tables.
Yes.
Okay, so assignment is to update a 2 table.
2 rows.
2 table, player table and game table.
Okay. Okay.
Update insert.
Right. When you insert into players, you will update 2 tables. When you insert into games, you will update 2 tables. It does not apply to the rounds table. Okay. I will try to get this written up. I've been working on it and trying to figure out exactly where we were going with it. But I like this one in that keep it simple, but it'll still be complicated enough. Okay. So you don't have to worry about, we're not asking, how many games did this person win? Although we could add that in the future revision 26 of our game. We won't. This will be sufficient into the day. So when we finish, we want to, this is kind of like the invoice line items and invoices. The trigger is going to look a lot like that. Whereas, so go to your trigger that you have, excuse me. At the end, you insert. If the insert fails, you're not here. Okay. Now push that down. Lock your rows. Get your totals. update the statistics table. So you want a transaction. Basically, I want to see a transaction. I'm looking for a transaction. I'm looking for a transaction such that if something fails, I want it to roll back. So there's two of them that I'm looking for there. Okay. Work with the players first. That'll be the easiest one. Just basically, all you do is update the count of the 0 row. What is the primary key? Primary key would be the number of games. You're not guaranteed that you will have all of them. You're not guaranteed that you will have 0 through 7. Not guaranteed that you won't have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Could have it. They have to be unique, yeah. Because if they weren't unique, they'd collapse.
When you have a chance, can you show us how to generate the game? How you show us how to generate a player, right? How to generate a game. The player has a 17,000 and the game is only like a 9,000.
Well, it's just because I didn't feel like generating any more. There's a limit to how many rows you can have in SQL Express, and I'm pushing it. I could have said 64,000, but I would have been too big for SQL Express. SQL Express limits you to how many total rows you can have. That's somewhere around 30,000.
When we insert a player, it should look like in the num player column in the row 0.
It will, yes. So when you insert a player, so if you're working down in little numbers just to test it, and you insert a player, then you should see that player reflected as a player that is involved in 0 games, yes, if that's all you do. Then when you insert a game involving that player, you should see 2 rows get updated. You can't have a negative number. I would suggest doing a count each time. So update it and then count. So this code will count. Not that bad, Mary. Okay. Now this is a real world game. I mean, task. This is done a lot. Okay. Only thing that I regret that we haven't done in here is performance tuning. I think what I would do is when I teach it again, I think I'll get out of the blocks into the more advanced topics faster instead of fooling around with cursors. I'm going to mention a cursor very briefly and say, okay, this is how you do it. And we like to avoid them, but sometimes I'm stuck and I have to allow multiple inserts. If I have to allow multiple inserts, then I have to have a cursor. Okay, I'm gonna end there for tonight. I'll try to get this written up tomorrow and posted. I am grading. It takes a while to grade. I'd much rather grade code than grade a test. Code either runs or it doesn't, and then I can usually figure out why. Okay. So I'm going to pause the recording.